everybody. I'd like to call to order the Assembly Budget Finance Committee meeting. Let's go through and do introductions and we'll start this one.
Dick Randy at Subway.
Albert Jackson.
Amy DeBoski.
Shirley Nelson, Budget Advisory Commission.
Bill Evans. Bernie Hall.
Pete Peterson, Tim Steele.
I would like those who are going to be doing presentations to please join us at the table. That means Mr.
That's what we're.
Wilbur and Mr. Moore. Please, thank you. All right, MOA financial status, report from the treasurer and home detail records. You have the floor.
Okay, so thank you to the chair and to the committee and the rest of the assembly members here. My name is Dan Moore, I'm the city treasurer, and just to give you a verbal update on these revenues for the city, we just produced our draft report yesterday, and when I compare it to the report that the assembly was given just a week or two ago, we are up about $900,000. So the report you saw a week or two ago was $4.6 million of a positive variance, and this is for all the 100 funds, which include the investments and include Fund 181. So we were at 4.6, now we're at 5.4, and it is positive. As a percentage, it's about 0.8% positive when you compare the budgeted number to the actual, or the projected actual. And the three main reasons for the increase are property taxes, personal property taxes. The assessor's office basically was able to recapture some prior year taxes from Doyon Utilities, and that was a pretty significant amount of recapture. So that was several $100,000 of additional revenue there. The EMS, the ambulance runs that occur, the fire department has been pretty conservative throughout the year with their estimate. Now that we're right toward the end of the year, they have increased it. It was another, gosh, it was, I'll tell you just 1 second here. $633,000. So that was the biggest single increase since the last report. I would caution on that, however, because as you know from all the articles about SPICE and all that, there's been a lot of extra ambulance runs, and I would not assume that those are going to be as collectible as typical ambulance runs. So, but fire department's aware of that. We've sort of pushed back a little bit. They still think that they're going to. It's going to be about $1 million overall above the budget is what they've projected. The other area, and this is actually a negative, is the police department on their traffic fines that are paid timely at the counter. That got worse by about $127,000. The one thing I'll say about the police department, because it actually is, I guess, one of the true sort of areas of negative revenue this year, and is if you look at the police department as a department for their revenue, and if you were to strip out any benefit they got from the surplus in property taxes, any benefit they got from any surplus in investment income, so all you're left with is just sort of core police department revenues. If you look at the true number for the police department, they are $941,000 in the hole with their revenues. And that's primarily due to traffic fines. And what I'll say about traffic fines, and this is something I think Assemblymember Jennifer Johnson brought up to the police department at the last meeting. She actually asked the question. There seems to have been a drop in the fines. And so what we saw is in the first 6 months of this year, the police department was 20 to 30% ahead in terms of number of citations. And that was after two really bad, like we thought bottomed out years of volumes of citations. So in the last couple of years, number of citations were about 22,000, somewhere around there per year. The long-term average is 40,000, okay, over a 15-year long-term average. So we thought the last 2 years were behind us, and for the first 6 months of this year, it looked like those bad years were behind us. The police department volumes were up 20 to 30% during the first half of the year. We know that it's very much resource driven. So But we also assumed, and we thought reasonably, that that trend could continue the second half of the year. In the month of September alone, if you compare September of this year to September last year, police fines are down, the number of citations, this is the volume of citations, down 50%. Okay, October down 27%, November down 29%. I'm really not sure what's causing this. We have reached out in writing to the police department to say, please explain this sharp decrease in the volume. It doesn't make sense to us at all, and it is of concern because we really thought we were, we bottomed out and we were going to start coming back up. So this will affect things for 2016 if it were to continue, because when the majority assembly increased police fines, the assumption was the volume, which we thought was rock bottom, would stay, at least at that level and not go down any further. So we'll see kind of what happens, but right now they are definitely behind the curve with the volume tickets. And like I said, it's a resource-driven issue, but as far as I know, the resource in the first 6 months of the year existed in the third quarter of the year, so I really don't know what's going on there. And I did listen to the answer at the assembly meeting, and it really didn't provide much of an answer. So I just think you should definitely be forewarned about that, because I think there is an issue there. But other than that, the revenues are quite stable. We are getting right down to the end of the year. We don't know of any particular big surprises. The Federal Reserve yesterday increased the interest rate by 25 basis points. That does create some volatility, especially in fixed income markets where we have our cash pool money invested. So for some period of time, the sort of mark-to-market adjustments that have to be done by the city to sort of show what the market's doing, they could show some negative investment returns, and they could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but eventually that will work its way out. And in some ways, it's better to have it happen at the end of the year, and then next year, it's going to have plenty of time to recover. They do predict that the interest rates could go up 3 or 4 times next year. The long-term average is when the Federal Reserve starts increasing interest rates, the long-term average since 1980 is they do 4 increases per year. So you're going to keep seeing this. And even I'll just say one example with property taxes. If you're delinquent on your property taxes, you pay interest. Well, just on that small change yesterday, and then let's say they make another small 25 basis point change by March, interest on delinquent property taxes will generate another $75,000, just because. So it's going to have a big effect on the city. It should be positive, but there is going to be some volatility probably the next 6 months or so. And but I just say be patient, and it's going to be on an upward path for quite some time. They have a long way to go to bring interest rates back up. Okay, so that's the report.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Training.
Dan, we got an email recently from somebody that said their neighbor died over a year ago. Also, why their neighbor still gets the property tax exemption. So my question to you is, do we routinely check people to make sure they're still living bodies?
Yeah, it depends if they have a surviving spouse, and I don't know if they lived alone. We do get information. We check obituaries and things like that, and it's actually the assessor's office that does that. But yeah, we if we either see an obituary or someone tells us about it, we go and if they've been getting the residential exemption, or excuse me, is this residential exemption or senior or maybe both? Okay, so if they've been getting it and they really weren't entitled to it, then they will go back in time. The assessor's office will go back in time and reassess the taxes.
And we'll send the email we got.
Okay, that would be good. Yep.
Another thing would be on the police fines.
Yeah.
Is there any one police fine that's having a bigger problem than other ones? I want to know if there's a problem that we need to correct the fine.
Not that we're aware of. It's we're looking at just the aggregate numbers. So no, I don't, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Training. Mr. Bosky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I didn't seem to be so excitable about
That's okay.
answering. So, Mr. Trini, I'll be happy to forward the email to you, or I can give it to the chair and she can distribute it. But I was in communication with Bryant Robbins from Appraisal, and that issue has been, he's addressed it. But I did, I'll pass it along, so you can distribute it.
Well, thank you. It was just the email that came in the bowl area. I just want to make sure we clean that up.
Well, like you know, I don't stick to boundaries, so I'm happy to get your business
Actually, you
too.
put that part of the bowl in your area. total sliver.
Yeah, but,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you, Mr. Dombrowski, thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dombrowski, would you forward that from clerk so that she can forward it to all of us, all 11 of us? Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Wilbur,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
you're welcome.
So I just have a short report for the month of October. I just want to let the committee know how the municipality is doing. November closed in the first week of December. So as the result, at the end of October 31st, the municipality was 83.3% through its year in both labor and non-labor. We are under budget in both areas. Labor is at about 80% and non-labor is about 82%. So municipality and the departments are still managing their money. The mayor requested to keep these expenses down before the end of the year. We have a couple of departments that you will see on the monthly expenditure report that's going to the assembly for information. The CFO's office, he has a position that's not directed or appropriated to the right cost center, so that one's just throwing us up on the radar. We're in the process of correcting that, and we we encumbered some money for a contract to do IGC studies as it relates to the RCA, so that was a large blip in theirs. I think they will be on track at the end of the year. Real estate, we're waiting for some lease payments to come in, so they're showing a little bit over expenditures. And then the fire department is over expended, and there is a supplemental appropriation before the assembly, so it will show up on your report for $930,000, and they're running into some overtime and some non-labor costs. Part of it is related to SPICE, and I think the chief will. Well, I know the chief will be there aggressively. I think overall, municipality is in good shape at the end of October, and I think November I don't see any surprises. So that's all I have for financial status.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lance, if the fire department's $930,000 in the hole, basically, and their EMS runs have generated 930-something thousand, are you taking that into account, or is that above and beyond?
So the EMS is part of the 930. The EMS,
Okay.
yeah, it's a combination of EMS and fire. Yeah, both of them are running proportion, particularly as it relates to SPICE. It's EMS.
I'm sorry, Mr. Abbott, you need to clarify.
Yeah, the challenge for the fire department is that they've got an appropriation limit that they need to, that they're going to exceed by $900,000. So, as Mr. Moore mentioned, they're doing very well in terms of revenues, but regardless of how they're doing on revenues, they can't exceed their appropriation limit without the consent of the assembly. So that's what we're going for. The net of the department is still probably going to be better than anticipated because of the better than expected ambulance and other sources as well. But there's sort of two separate issues. Regardless of whether there's enough revenue to cover it or not from fees or other sources, we still need the assembly's permission to exceed the spending authority that has been granted most recently at first quarter revisions.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Anything else, Mr. Wilbur?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Okay, next on the agenda is a report from the Budget Advisory Commission. Ms. Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We met in the 1st of December. Not much has changed. We're still continuing to work with the property tax exemption report, and we are scheduling a meeting in January and February with Bryant Robbins to continue the talk and discussion, and we're going to form various questions for him regarding the report and see if he can give us the information, and we'll hold a meeting, so we'll keep you updated on that. Also, just recently, the school district, so now we're switching over a little bit because their budget will be the forefront. So they just released their pro forma, and I was at that meeting, and I'll bring that data to our next meeting as well. But it's, once again, the deficit and so on and so forth. So we had a pretty good discussion on where they think it's going, and they did different scenarios of the state and so on and so forth. But I think one of the issues that we wanted to look into as the advisory commission was their unassigned general fund balance. And so we're just have questions in with that. They had a health plan waivers contribution of $4.9 million, and they have purchased buses, and so we're trying to get a little more information on that. And I know they've already purchased, and like that, and they're also putting buses on a bond. And so these are just the things that we are looking into to bring more discussion to the table with the school district. And there will be challenges, as we know. So,
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Trainee?
Ma'am, they want a bond for buses, so can we get a recommendation from your committee?
I'm sorry, say that again.
They want a bond for more buses. Can we get a recommendation from your committee on the value of bonding for something like a bus?
Sure, because I
They're
think
different than a building.
I think that they're looking to bond for 24 more, beyond what they just spent 9.5 million on buses. And they've already purchased those with this unassigned fund balance and so on. And yes, we are looking into that. Because now, from our perspective, what we've been saying, we know buses are important and it falls in different category, but now we're looking at deficits in other areas too. So, yes, I will look into that for you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Nelson, before I go to Mr. Bosky and Mr. Steele, just one comment. At our joint meeting, which was last Friday, Chairman Trainee and I had some concerns about using bond money to buy buses, and we asked the school district if they would look into whether or not they could receive grants from the federal government for buses in the same way that the transit department does. And so they're looking into that, and also received an email that that said, yeah, that's a possibility, but I'm still waiting to hear from the administration. So thank you, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shirley, one of the things that would be interesting to articulate when you talk to the school district, I know Nancy's told us before, when we do fire apparatus, though we ask for a 20-year bond, they manage it to the life cycle of that apparatus, just to ensure that the school district is doing the same thing. If we bond for a bus, basically, and, we have to replace it in 8 years, but we actually spread it out over 20, that would be something that would be important, I think, for us to know.
I think, Amy, on that one, that came up in part of the discussion with Mark Foster, and I want to say, if I understood it, was 10 years is what they were doing.
And that still could be problematic because a school bus, I don't know how many of them actually last 10 years.
I got 28.
So,
28, 24.
I forgot you were sitting over there, Mr. Abbott. My comment, and it might be an offline conversation with Mr. Wilbur as to how the municipality does it with their fire apparatus, because my understanding is we manage that bond to the life of the vehicle, or the expected life of the vehicle. So if they have something that's double the life of the vehicle, that could be something that we might have a discussion with the school district about changing their policy.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky, Ms. Nelson. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, on that particular point, they're saying that what they're replacing for over 20 years, they're saying they're 28 and 24 years old, some of the buses they're replacing. So it's not a shorter life. It looks to me like they use them for longer. Some of those, I think, are special needs buses that have big doors, and so functionally they're different. But anyway, the other question I have with regards to the school district is the state's been paying on the retirement, and I'm just I'm concerned that we're going to get further and further in the hole, and then at some point in time they're going to say, "City, take it over." Take over the school district and city or portion of that the state's been paying. So there's potential issues there.
If I might address that, I had a conversation with Mark Foster on that particular subject because I believe if I've got, I think I have it, it's 22%? HERS is different than the TERS, there's 20 that. And yes, there is talk going on that possibly the state may want to pass on more of that responsibility to the Anchorage School District, but they said they would have a hard battle with that because of the way it's written in and so on. But it is a concern. But it is a possibility but Mark tended to think it would not come to fruition, although he thinks it might happen.
One more question here. If they're willing to, a comment I suppose, if they're willing to renege on paying the bond, the portion of the bonding that they had said they were going to do, they'll be willing to change on that particular point in retirement. And we need to try and get them on the record saying, well, I know you're not going to talk to the legislature necessarily, but anytime we do, we need to say, hey, you guys need to pay what you committed to pay. So,
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson, did you have your hand up? Okay, thank you. All right, our next subject on our agenda is marijuana sales tax, ballot proposition ordinance. Everybody has a copy of it, and I've seen that everybody on the Budget Plans Committee had an opportunity to review the document. But if I may, I'm gonna yield to Mr. Hall as the chair of the marijuana committee, and if you'd like to just talk a little bit about this ordinance, Mr. Hall, we would really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to do that. The document that you got before you, it actually is in cooperation with both the Department of Revenue, with the legal department, and trying to get an analysis of some idea of what it's going to cost us for the implementation of this. And they've come up with a recommendation here of a ballot initiative that would authorize a 5% sales tax on marijuana. This tax would be above the cap. And the reason that this would be placed above the cap is this is a brand new cost driver here. We've got to address the cost of implementation, the enforcement of, as well as oversight. And you're playing a game when you're doing that because we really have no idea what that number is going to be. So we base it on the best facts that Dan can put together. So the recommendation was entry at 5% with the option to do 2% increases, no more than a 2% each 2 years if it's necessary to do, with a cap of 12% on this. I think the thing that's going to be interesting for us is actually getting into the startup costs, whatever we're going to need to buy to cover the implementation of the new marijuana industry. So that is pretty well it. Above the cap, 5%, and it's also drafted where it will only take a 50% vote for it to pass.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Before I go to Mr. Evans, I just want everybody to know that Mr. Moore is here, and I'm going to ask him to talk about some numbers, okay? Mr. Evans.
Two questions. The first is on the 5% figure. Understand the idea of having to recoup whatever costs we're going to be incurring in setting all this up. Was there any discussion or analysis done of not only the cost of the program itself, but like the alcohol tax that we have? Part of that is supposed to be designed towards fixing the problems that are also caused by the substance. Is any part of that 5%, earmarked or conceivably dedicated to that issue?
I am going to let Mr. Wilbur and Mr. Moore address that. They put it together and they shared with me what went into that. So please.
I appreciate that. With Mr. Evans, before we have discussion from both Mr. Moore and Mr. Wilbur, I need to go to Mr. Bosky first and get straight if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Bosky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hall, can you point to me where you're getting around the 60% threshold for new taxes?
Before we get around that,
Yes.
we would need Mr. Falsey here to address that. But it is addressed in here.
I just didn't remember seeing that, so that kind of caught me off guard when you said that. Where did I miss it? Oh, are you on this one here?
You take a look on page 2, line 36, item 4.
Okay, the right of immunity is adds in automatic escalators, and it's counter to essentially the charter right now. I mean, obviously, I can see you're trying to change language there or get around it, but typically new taxes require 60%. You've built in a lot of variables here that potentially could be rejected by the voters. That is of great concern. So, what's your plan B? If I mean, this is a doozy. So, what's your plan B if this fails?
We have the ability to go to an excise tax where we tax at the production level.
Okay. And my second comment that I have is, you know, I think you would get an overwhelming amount of voters. I would bet 70% if you would have gone to, you know, basically a flat tax, kept it under the tax cap. I think you would have grabbed a much larger swath of people doing it that way. And I understand the argument. So my concern is, basically, we put this on the ballot, it fails because we're really trying to grab as much as we can possibly grab. I mean, that's the perception, whether it's true or not. I mean, that's the perception. So what about a plan B and putting 2 questions on the ballot? One question be this, the other question, because I think Mr. Trainee has made good points about cost cause or cost payer. What about putting a second option on the ballot where it's an either or? It's either this one or potentially a flat tax under the cap. Because I think that was a slam dunk, personally.
Well, no one would imply there are not automatic escalators in here.
Or the
There's the
potential.
ability for the body to do an escalation, not an automatic.
No, you're right. And I guess I'm sorry for saying it that way, but I look at it without going back to the voters. I think every time we raise a tax, we should go back to the voters. And so I said it that way, and I think you're right. I think I said it wrong.
Yeah. My response to Mr. Baskey, when you're kind of looking at it, right, this is going to be an action of this body. The Finance Committee will actually make any decision on what comes forward. What we did with the Marijuana Committee was recognize the fact that we needed to deal with the sales tax. We sent that to legal and to the Revenue Department with the understanding that that would go back to the Finance Committee. So whatever the final look, whatever this ends up in final form is going to come out of this committee, not the Marijuana Committee.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize who was the driver on this one. I just looked at
Yes,
you because
yes.
they let you speak to it.
Finance Committee.
If I can chime in, thank you, Mr. Rossi, thank you, Mr. Evans, Mr. Hall. The reason why this ordinance is even on the agenda is because the Budget and Finance Committee has been asked to review it and to make some recommendations. I asked Mr. Hall to talk about it because he's the chair of the Marijuana Committee, and I thought he'd do a better job than I would. So, with that said, Mr. Trainee?
This is your question on the page 2, line 36 of the text. It was brought to us by the last city attorney. He said he's willing to take his reputation, and that will in fact lead to the requirements itself.
I still disagree with it. I
Well, he's
agree.
an attorney, you can disagree or not.
Well, my point is the intent of the tax cap, and that's why.
Yeah.
That's
He goes to the intent, he says it doesn't meet the law. So, and it's up to this Sunday, quite frankly, you can make an amendment what's in front of us to change it to 60%. You can get some votes, and that is what goes forward. But this is the recommendation put to this body to make a recommendation on the Sunday. The reason we didn't put it inside the tax cap is it doesn't help us. This is a new service, we've not had it before, and there's going to be demands on us for code enforcement, for police officers, for clerks. We need to have the ability to meet those demands. We don't have it in our current budget we've got for that, so that's the reason it's above the tax cap. Some will like it, some won't, and that's what we do.
Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Trainee, am I to understand that you're the one that helped write this? You seem to
I'm
know.
one of them.
Okay, well, I'm just asking because my thought is this is a collaborative process and we're in public, we can talk about it. But my question would be if there was a negotiated opportunity to potentially, you know, in my view, protect the tax cap and leave it at 60%, but leave it outside the tax cap, if that would be something that the committee would consider as an alternative and some sort of negotiated opportunity. You know, I'm just throwing it out there because the point of the committee is to discuss it and kind of make recommendations. But to go to, I know we're not necessarily debating it, but the point of being outside the tax cap or inside the tax cap, I know during the recent budget process between Mr. Evans, at least that were all rejected. So I'm not convinced that we have to go outside the tax cap. That's the hurdle, I think, for me, you have to overcome when you reject savings, but then go outside the tax cap just a month later. I don't know how I can go back to my constituents and say we really need to do that. So it's just something to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky, Mr. Trainer, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I'm concerned on the other side. I think we're going to be having substantial, we're going to use substantial resources at the front end in terms of approving locations and all that that entails. I'm not sure. Do we have money budgeted for it? Additional money, or we're just taking it out of Hyde in terms of the assembly staff at least?
Mr. Moore is going to talk about the numbers as soon as the
All right,
discussion
good.
is done, and I think that it is because I don't see any more hands.
Yeah.
Mr. Moore, you have the floor.
Okay, well, between Lance and I, we split duties here, so if you want, I can talk about revenues first, and then Lance will talk
That'll
about
work
the cost side.
perfectly.
Okay, so for the revenues, what we looked at the draft ordinance, so I guess it's now final and submitted, and
Let me back you a
Yes.
minute. It's not final and it
Okay.
hasn't been submitted.
oh, it hasn't been submitted?
No.
Oh, I thought it had. Okay. The marijuana, the retail sales tax on marijuana.
Oh,
Not on the tax.
No,
but
the
on
sales
The
tax.
marijuana, how it's going to be regulated.
Oh, no, I wasn't talking.
no, we're talking about the sales.
I'm talking about sales tax.
Right, it hasn't gone anywhere.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so for assuming it does make it that far, what we did is we looked at the rate, and I guess what's proposed there is a 5% to start, and then it has that 2% every 2-year escalator up to a maximum of 12%. And I think the 12% came from something we told this group a while back, that 12% was sort of a good long-term target. So we agree with that approach because what we've seen, and this is with information from Colorado and Washington, is to start out low and slow is the best course of action. The big competitor in the marketplace is the black market. So if we start out too high, too fast, too aggressive, we're going to just further encourage the black market. And then when you have marijuana more in use around the city, it's going to be pretty unclear as to where it came from and whether it's legal or illegal. So what we did is we looked at this proposal and we estimated how much revenue would potentially be derived in the first 6 months, which is basically it's about mid-year that it would really come into play for 2016. And then every 2 years it would have that escalator built into it. So I have a chart here that we can hand out that I can speak from, and then you'll kind of see. But what's going to really vary is the mix of black market versus legal market. That's a huge swing, and then the price of the product. Right now, with legal taxes added on, it could be as high as $400 an ounce. But worst case scenario, it could drop within the first 5 or 6 years by 50%. So the amount of revenue you generate is not going to always go up and up and up because the price of the product is going to go down, and that's been seen in these other jurisdictions pretty dramatically. So there's a lot of counterbalancing here, and what I'll show you on this chart, it's going to show you some ranges, and maybe we'll just focus on that. Bliss from Treasury has copies. And Bliss, maybe you can walk half of them over to that side, and we'll pass them around. We have about 20 total copies, so I'll make sure all these other numbers have it. Sure. Okay, so the chart here, I'm just going to highlight a few of the points. These are various scenarios that could occur. And so there's ranges, highs and lows, and then there's the blue line. The thick blue line is the average scenario that might occur. And this chart shows full years. So like if you did a summary of economic effects for the ordinance, you have to show the first full year one, etc. So that's what we focused on here. If you just want to know what that first half year of implementation might be, it's somewhere around $650,000. And of course, whatever resources Lance is going to talk about, you're probably not going to need all those resources on day one, right? Because the market, the retail operations, it's going to take a while to build out. So, but anyway, so if you look at this chart, it's focusing on 12 months. It's also focusing on that option to increase by up to 2% every year. So we assumed, just to show you the maximum effect, if the assembly every 2 years chose to go up the 2%, and these are your option periods that are shown here, within 6 years, which is approximately, based on the research that's been done, and we have a really talented person in Treasury that helps us with all this, based on that, in the 6 years we feel it will be fairly mature in a pretty known market. So that's our guidepost. In 6 years, you're not going to be at the 12%. You're still going to have some more options to exercise if you choose. But in terms of the average, the thick blue line, in the first full year, the first 12 months of having a retail marijuana sales tax at 5% starting rate, $1.3 million is what the annual figure would be on average. Okay, in the subsequent 2 years, where you possibly could go up from 5% to 7%, that 1.3 would then go to 2.2 million. And then another 2 years, you go to 3.1 million. I might be reading, yeah. Oh, okay, so you say, well, why aren't these all just, symmetrical, going up in a perfect way? Those assumptions are really key. The price and the share of black market to legal market, they change every year throughout. So built into this, even though these numbers look kind of, straightforward, and you got these nice graphs, there's a lot of moving parts that are behind this. So that's why it's not completely symmetrical when you look at these numbers. So if you go out to this 6th year and you say, what's the mature market, if we're at that stage by then, $3.2 million of annual revenue is probably in the midpoint. It could be as low as 1.4 million or as high as 5.4 million. And the big assumptions here, let's just say on the very high end, you're assuming the legal market share is 90%. I personally don't think that's likely at all. Okay, in Colorado, the most recent study, and they've been in business, so to speak, the longest, almost, 2 years. I think they're about 20 or 22% legal market. The black market is huge, and it's really hard to, tap into that because it's so well established. So if everything were to go great and we had this incredible outcome, 90% of the market would be legal market, and the price per ounce would stay high, relatively high. Right now, according to a study we found out in Colorado, with taxes built in, it was like $400. In the high end, it would be about $300. So it would be a 25% decrease in price, and we have captured a whole bunch of the market. That's very, very optimistic. If you look at the opposite end, worst case scenario, and these are just bands of things, but it just shows you how things can be different. The price could drop from $400 an ounce to $200. It could drop 50%, and it has dropped steeply in these other jurisdictions. So a lot of the studies that have been doing the projections say expect it could drop 50%. So that's that part. The legal market share, we hope within 6 years, if we start out low and slow, that we're going to actually be a competitor with the black market, and that we will get to 50%. Right now, after 2 years, Colorado's in the low 20s. So we think that could happen. Okay, but that just shows you the range, and people can debate about whether we'll get there or not. We really don't know. We're going to have to really monitor this very closely all throughout the year, and just make adjustments and feed the assembly information so you can decide whether or not you want to make those adjustments every 2 years. So this is our best range of revenue estimation. If you do submit the ordinance, the summary of economic effects, these are the numbers that we would provide. And other than that, I'm just thinking if there's anything else. We did look at what our overall rate would be. So if we eventually got to a 12% rate, the excise tax that the state is going to do, which is $50 per ounce, is based on the weight. That is the equivalent of about 13% sales tax if you were to do math on that. So 12% plus 13 is 25%. So in Anchorage, with a local tax and a state tax, effectively it'd be about 25% at the far end mature, that'd probably be 8 or 9 years down the road. our 20, if we ever got to that level of 25%, that would be right in the midpoint of what these other jurisdictions are already doing. So, and they're newer in the market. We're actually learning from them, and we're learning to not start out too high, too early. And so that's why we, in the past, we recommended the 12%, but we didn't, that was more the long-term rate. Starting out lower and slower is actually better. So that's all the highlights I have.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Trainee?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think there's some things to consider. Ernie brought them forward. We're going to need more code enforcement officers. Because somebody's going to have to enforce this law that's working its way through its E&Z now. We're going to have code enforcement officers. I appreciate the state coming through legislation. The state doesn't have the money to enforce their own regulations. We're going to have ours in place for our code enforcement to do it. We're going to need clerks because we're going to do a licensing. Both the state and the city will license people. Our clerk's office will have to be in touch with everybody, both the people that want to sell it and the community council. Other thing is police officers. There's going to be an impact on our police officers. And then we've got the law department that's going to have to take care of what happens when these people are arrested. And so it's outside the tax cap because it's a new area, as Ernie's pointing out. We've not done this before. So it lends itself to being outside the tax cap because we don't have the money right now. If we tried to add this burden on our taxpayers, we all get the calls from people that say, why don't you have officers come and investigate this burglary or this car theft, these windows for you? We don't have the money. So we need to add this structure on to provide this service for this new industry.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans?
I appreciate the analysis that went into that. A lot of those factors that we don't often think about. I think that was really well done. It does help clarify the situation. Do we have a similar analysis on what Mr. Trainee was talking about, our projected costs over this?
Lance, I think.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Ruber, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Evans, I don't have a beautiful graph like Mr. Moore here, but we did a similar approach as Treasury on the revenue as it relates to the expenses. We reached out to the other jurisdictions, received some kind of the departments that were most engaged initially and how they ramped up and then how they cooled off after marijuana was legalized and held. So basically 7 departments have in the responses that are going to have the most effect. And these are not necessarily in priority order. Mr. Trainee mentioned most of them. APD, AFD, because there's fire inspections and there's a lot of other inspections that have to be done. The planning department, as it relates to zoning and things that they're going to have to do. DHHS, as it relates to education and the health effects of it. Treasury has a significant role in it. Code enforcement has another role, and I think I've got them all. So legal, Treasury, planning, development services, DHHS, police, fire, and the clerk. So when I asked them, not knowing how many businesses we would have in business the first year and how long it would take them to ramp up, I asked them to assume, based on the information that I gave them, in 1 year, what would it be and how much would the initial cost? So it's around $2.5 million split between labor and non-labor. Because as it relates to APD, there's evidence collections, there's software information needs to be done, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done in Treasury for the ability to monitor and collect. So it's about half and half, so that the second half would cool off. A lot of the questions that I got were, Lance, we need to know how many businesses, we need to know how fast they're going to operate, because then we can know how hard, when we would hire them. So in the long run, if it was in place, it would, based on the limited information that they had, it's about 1.2 to maybe 1.5 in labor annually. Personally, the first year would be a lot less than that, but that's based on what they know. And I didn't tell them how much money we might gain, because it really wouldn't be relevant. I just wanted to know what their expenses might be. And so, when I looked at it, there were some questions that I hadn't had a chance to reach back to the departments about, really, do you need 2 of these people, right away? So we have some refinement to do on our end, but I think the departments, they put a lot of thought into what they needed and what the cost would be. The biggest unknown is how much and how fast. So that's kind of what the analysis was, but that's a general ballpark of what we have, and I got a lot more detail from police and from and Treasury than I did from some of the other departments. So we had to extrapolate based on what we had. So I think they did a good job, and it's a good place to start. I can provide this committee some more detailed information about the departments for labor and non-labor and what it was to do before. A lot of software, a lot of evidence collection. It's a lot of being able to track it, which is stuff they don't have right now.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan, have you looked at other communities around the state to see what tax rates they're implementing, how they're doing it? For example, I think I heard somewhere saying 8%, but how are they handling it? Do they have tax caps? Are they doing it inside, outside? I mean, do you know any of those?
I don't, through the chair, I don't know on any tax cap issues. I had heard about Juneau at 8%, I think Fairbanks at 5%. And so, yeah, I pretty much know the rates that they've been considering. In terms of the detailed rules behind it, I don't know.
Okay, so Juneau, I did see in the paper they passed 8, so Fairbanks did pass 5%.
I heard 5%. Is that like
Fairbanks City.
Yep.
in
Fairbanks
the
City.
city of Fairbanks? Okay. City
Yeah, I
of
don't
Fairbanks.
know that those were, Juneau's was not voter approved, I believe. I believe they just did that by ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Evans.
Just to follow up, Lance, that's why, to make sure I understand what you were saying. So the 1.5 estimate, and I understand that there's a gazillion unknowns here that could impact that dramatically. But the 1.5 million would be the cost across all 7 departments you talked about at a time when we believe it's a fully functioning industry. Correct. Sort of like the 5th year or 6th year under Dan's or
Maybe even the third.
whatever, okay, and some level up to that point. So even if we get the low end on Dan's analysis in the final years, we should be having very close to enough to cover costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Hall.
Yes. I want to cover 3 points, Madam Chair. One, in reply to Ms. Kandowski, I've had the same issue in regards to 50% versus 60%. I would be very comfortable either way this went on there. I think the votes would be there, whatever the percentage to approve this tax. So that's above my pay grade when it comes to charter. I mean, that's certainly not above mine, but a decision in regards to whether we do that should be one of the body. But I looked at legal direction, and that's where the advice comes that this could possibly be a 50%. And I do want to be clear about the escalator. I realize that Mr. Moore used that term. The provision is there for it, but it will take an action of the body in order to be able to do any kind of an escalator. And I think the thing that we all really need to pick up on is the fact that where this marijuana tax is totally different to tobacco tax. Tobacco tax puts what in our budget every year, 22 million, where you're taking a product that it's not possible to have a black market, and when they do and get caught, the penalties are very severe. So that black market competition in this it's a big deal in regards to what we're able to do. In regards to this being outside of the tax, we've had a lot of discussion in regards to that, and I really don't see a way for the startup for this not to be outside of, because it's totally new costs. If we put it under the cap, then that means you're just going to have to, to absorb with the existing. So, but I think discussion needs to be there about it shouldn't be forever outside of the tax. Once you get a cost basis and you know what your revenue is going to be, it probably should move back under the cap. It shouldn't be there forever. And that's another thing that's part of the learning curve when we start up with the industry. And the other thing, Madam Chair, which of course you're very conscious of in regards to this, is the timeline that you've got to be able to deal with this, because we do have to have this before the body. So we need to be looking at what that last date is so we can have action on it for it to be on the ballot in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Bosky.
Thank you. A question to Dan. Can you give me some clarity with the alcohol tax for the state, where we're coming in marijuana tax? And I think Mr. Hall brings up a good point when he talks about a mitigating factor, maybe not having clarity, would be the black market, and the
so I can email you or the body afterward and let you know kind of how it compares with alcohol. Like regular cigarettes, alcohol is heavily regulated, and you don't have a big black market competing with. So, but I'll let you know.
That would be helpful, and not that I've asked you, because I don't know if I have, but I've asked that question in multiple venues, and I've not gotten an answer.
Okay.
And I'm not saying you have an answer, I'm just saying I haven't heard it yet.
Okay.
And then to go to Mr. Hall's point about this not being in the tax cap forever, what I would tell you is if you give government a tax outside the tax cap, I don't think you'll ever see it go back personally. I'm just a little cynical, but my other point is I think we have to be mindful of not operating in a vacuum either, because as the treasurer gave his report, it appears during first quarter budget revisions, we can have some $5 million potentially that could be used for startup. So that's just something to consider. If we do have surplus from this year, we might be able to use some of that money during first quarter budget, because we'll start reviewing applications for licenses late February, right? Is that the time frame, Mr. Hall?
They can apply to the state in February. We would expect to see applications coming in here late April, early May.
That's perfect. That's right in time with first quarter budget revision. So it's, if you're concerned about startup costs and that kind of thing, as we know, you put the tax in, there's going to be a lag time anyway. So that might be something for the Assembly to consider ahead of time. Just a thought.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky, Mr. Tranny, and then Mr. Evans.
Yeah, how much did you say we get off tobacco tax a year?
It's about 22 million.
How much we get off alcohol tax a year?
Zero. City bank.
I know, the thing is, alcohol is taxed at zero by the city, we can't, the state does. How we use their money, they can use it for anything the state needs. Right now, with the budget rules they've got, this gives us a chance to address the issue of marijuana and get taken care of. Well, this would, the voters, the marijuana people said we want to be taxed. So I'm more than happy to let them be taxed, because I want to make sure the cost caused, the cost payers, we cover the impact of this to our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tranny, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As everybody is aware, I've been working on general-based sales tax for a while, and it's actually done and can be rolled out at any point hereafter. One of the things that became very evident in just going through the discussions I had with various entities and people regarding the sales tax is that there is a large level of mistrust. When we're talking about it, in my proposal was to basically place the sales tax under the cap. So it would be an offset to property taxes. But even with that, people are distrustful of us. And whether, it would stay that way or whether it would ratchet up. And I think you all realize that there is that level of mistrust out there. One of the main concerns I have with it, I'm all for taxing the marijuana industry. I'm all for even having it above the tax cap initially, because they are new charges. I am, however, greatly uncomfortable with the concept of bypassing the 60% vote. I think, whether they're right or wrong, 60% vote, people sort of count on that. It's one of the checks they have on us, one of the ways they think they can have some trust in us, because they have these mechanisms in place that keep us from going crazy. And I think when we go about it, and it is perfectly lawful, it's been done before, it's the 9th Center kind of example, we can do it, and you can probably pass it this way, but I think even if we do, there's a certain segment of the population that becomes even more distrustful, because it basically shows that they can put all the limitations on us they want with the 60% limit, and we'll find ways to get around it. And in particularly this issue, I think is a bad time to do it, because I think, as I think Mr. Bosky said, I'm pretty sure this will pass at 60%. Most everybody, the people that are proponents for the marijuana and the people that are opponents, will want to tax this. So I think this is just a bad place to do what I call the gimmick and reduce the 60% sales tax requirement to 50%. So I will never vote for it as presently constituted, even if it means not having a marijuana tax, because I won't go for that 50% reduction. But if we could change that, I'd be all for it.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Before I go to Mr. Bostic, I just like for everybody to know that it's the intent that this ordinance come from the Budget Finance Committee. And it needs to be introduced on Tuesday, so it'll be placed on the agenda. So hopefully, after Mr. Bostic, we can work through some recommendations and make some changes to this, or not, and then give it to the clerk's office for the agenda for Tuesday. Mr. Bostic?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot to mention this point when Mr. Hall was speaking, but when you're talking about the 60% versus the 50%, and Mr. Evans obviously is more eloquent than I always am, but the point is, if you can mitigate the number of factors that potentially could drive this to failure, I think it's wise to do so. And as the ballot Proposition 2 said, it's to tax and regulate like alcohol. So I think even the people that voted for it, I think a lot of people, whether they use it or not, are going to say, they want it to be taxed and regulated, let's tax and regulate them. But when we start doing these little get-arounds, and maybe I misspoke earlier, I recognize they did this with the Devina Center, and it was allowed. And I also remember the campaign that promised we would never do it again. And I'll share with you, Mr. Peterson, I saw the look on your face. At the time, an AM that accompanied that ordinance. And so I think, from that perspective, from a state level, we're talking about income tax, we're talking about all these other things, and then we put this on the ballot with some of those factors that, you're going to tick off a few people. And when I say tick, I don't mean mad. I mean, you're going to diminish the pool the more factors you put in there that look like it's a get around. And I think it's something that will be concerning to voters. So I concur with both Mr. Evans and Mr. Hall that, in fact, I think it should, just put it on its face value, what the intent of tax cap was for 60% for any new tax.
Thank you, Mr. Bostic. Mr. Hall?
Yes. I want to come back to the cap issue again. Technically we do that every year. Any new properties that are built during the year that comes onto the rolls are above the cap each year. We allow a percentage for growth, and then the following year it goes in under and becomes a part of the base. That's how I perceive marijuana being structured and going above the cap with looking at that eventually happening. I just don't know that you can do that one in 1 year. I think you're going to need a time to allow it to level out so you know what the true costs and expenses are, and then at that point you should. But I also think that when you look at it to roll it under, you need to be looking at that it is still generating money above the cost to general government, because that's the whole idea, is covering the cost to general government, because this is an industry that's going to bring expenses to the community other than what we're giving consideration to street maintenance. You just go through the whole thing with additional people. So I really believe it should start out above, but I don't know how you go about setting that time when it would roll under, but you do need to give it time to allow so we get a true cost of what it's going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. We could probably ask language, but anyway, I know there's 7 assembly members here, which is really great. Thank you all for being here. But the committee members are Mr. Bosky, myself, Mr. Evans, Mr. Steele, and Mr. Peterson, I believe. So with that said, we need to make some recommendations so we can move on. Okay, and the first recommendation is, I need somebody to make a motion that we accept the amount that's in the ordinance, the 5% and to make that recommendation.
Madam Chair, I'll go ahead and accept the 5% basis for the initial tax for marijuana.
So you're making a motion to accept it, and somebody can second?
Second.
Does anybody disagree? Okay, so the ordinance will remain the same in terms of the tax amount. Now, in terms of the 60%, Mr. Evans, would you like to make a motion on that issue?
Sure. I would move to amend the proposed ordinance to eliminate the, I don't want to
50% plus one.
Yeah, to make the ordinance subject to the 60% requirement of sales tax, and to direct the Department of Law to change the ordinance to meet that.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. Anybody disagree? Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I just want to make I wanted to discuss it because I don't have a problem with the 60%. I think the 60% will work just as well as the 50%. The thing is, we have the cost no matter what. This is designed, it's a user tax to pay the cost of government. If the voters vote it down, we still got the cost. So have to get the money from somewhere else. But so
Mr. Steele, I don't mean to cut you off, but right now we're just dealing with the 60%. So does everybody agree that this committee recommends that we change the ordinance to make it 60%? Does anybody disagree?
I'm arguing to that point. Basically, I think I think a 50% is better because it's a start. And but the 60%, if it fails, we still have to pay it. It doesn't do anything to the ordinance.
So are you saying your preference is to leave it 50%?
My personal preference is, but on the floor is a 60%.
Mr. Evans?
Just to respond to Mr. Steele's comments, and it's a good point, and I think Mr. Hall previously mentioned that should this fail, maybe we want to get 50%, who knows? But if it does, we have the ability to, have an excise tax without going through that rigmarole. So we could recoup it. And also, based on what Lance was telling us, even the fully developed cost of this program, or 1.5 million, eventually, in a $480 million budget, we can find, I think, 1.5 million, especially in light of hopefully, continued good news about where we're ending the year. So, while I think it's good to be concerned about that, I don't think it would be an emergency should it fail.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't believe there is going to be a problem reaching the 60%. I expect there would probably be 70-some% that would vote in favor of taxing marijuana at 5%. So I won't have a problem voting in favor of 60%.
Okay, thank you. And this is just, keep in mind, recommendations from the Budget and Finance Committee. So does everybody agree, the committee members, that we change the ordinance to say 60%? Okay, thank you. All right, the next issue is outside the tax cap issue. Okay, I'm not going to make a motion because I don't think I should or could, but I need somebody to make a motion that, and this is my recommendation, that we remain, based on the information that we have in the cost that's involved, that it remain as is. Does somebody have to make that motion?
I'll make the motion that it remain outside the tax cap.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
That's where it's going.
Mr. Dombowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I clearly stated, I think considering the last budget session where Mr. Evans, Mr. Starr, myself offered 48 amendments that could have saved multiple millions of dollars, I don't think it passes the red face test in order to say we can't afford to keep this under the tax cap, especially considering the fact that we'll likely have surplus funds in first quarter. I think we could easily appropriate that money to mitigate the startup costs of this new industry. So for that reason, I will not be supporting keeping this outside the tax cap.
Thank you. And before I go to Mr. Trainee, I just have a comment, okay? The prediction is that we're going to have a surplus, and it's a wonderful idea to think about using some of that money for this particular issue. But we don't know what the climate's going to be next year in terms of state funding. I mean, when we cut $4 million, we already know that. And we don't know what it's going to be like in the future. So I'm not sure that, well, as a matter of fact, I'm sure that I don't feel comfortable changing it because of that fact that I just stated. And Mr. Trainee, you had a comment?
I'm not part of this committee, but just
Okay.
in your comments, Mr. Bowski, the 40 could be reduced down to 3 items. Okay? It could have gone just for travel or just gone for supplies. You could have cut down 40 to about 3 items on the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele? and Mr.
I don't think general taxpayers should cover the cost of the marijuana users, and so therefore, I think it should remain outside the tax cap.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I
just not fully understanding the concept of how each side is envisioning this being inside or outside the tax cap. Are we saying that basically, as proposed, the marijuana tax will have, it just standalone, it doesn't come under the tax cap, it's never calculated like cigarettes tax and all that, it does get calculated when we're doing the tax cap calculation?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Tranny?
You know what you might want to do is write an amendment into here that after 10 years, or after some period of time, we can see how it matures, then it falls back under the tax cap. I mean, you're an attorney, I know you can write it.
You'd be
I'd be willing to
surprised.
support something like that. But just initially, we've got to have this definitely outside the tax cap. We have no idea on the demands on our city resources.
If I may?
Certainly, Mr. Evans.
And I think that would make a lot of us feel more comfortable if we had language actually incorporated this, that you know, after a certain period of time, and I think the 6-year time window that you have for kind of projecting a fully developed industry may be a good point, a good, you know, something to hang our hat on to use to say after 6 years, you've done whatever escalators you're going to do before that point, and at that point, at the end of 6 years, it automatically goes into the tax. Because then we've incorporated those costs, and it's just
Right.
business as usual. I think that'd be better.
So I just have a comment. So instead of using the term outside or inside the tax cap, here's what this ordinance would do. It will provide a program fee, if you will, to pay for the cost of implementing the sales tax. So that's the bottom line where it's at right now. But, so, Mr. Tranny, I think you have.
Just everyone's for a 6-year, and then it goes under the cap. I just want to take care of the initial onslaught, and then I have no problem putting it under the cap. So let's do 6 years. We get legal to write it. The mechanisms are even easier to get it.
Yeah, they get paid for that, so let's let them do it.
Thank you, Mr. Tranny. So
But
can
you
I
get paid all these dollars for being on the
Mr.
assembly.
Tranny? Thank you, Mr. Tranny. So, can I get someone from the committee to make a motion for a recommendation that we change the ordinance to leave it outside the tax cap, with the language out in the future that would change?
Sure. I will move that the ordinance be revised to reflect that after 6 years, the sales tax, the marijuana tax revenues are placed under the tax cap, and have municipal water department make the changes necessary to do that.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Anybody disagree with that proposed recommendation?
I
Mr.
disagree
Steele, I'm
with
sorry,
it.
Mr. Steele.
I disagree with it. I just don't think that it's appropriate for the general taxpayers to either bear the burden or, and I think it's going to be more cost than what we're going to generate in revenue, but I just don't think it's a user tax.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Does anybody else disagree? Okay, Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the attempt to mitigate some of the concerns. As I said before, and Madam Chair, I apologize in advance. I think when I was trying to make my point about the savings during the budget, it wasn't about the number of amendments, it was about the actual savings. And so I find the chairman's comments inappropriate. But I want to say I really appreciate Mr. Hall and Mr. Evans taking that into consideration about inside or outside the tax cap, because I think this is a mitigated opportunity. While I can't support the initial going outside the tax cap, because I think there's other avenues we could use, I think it's a more fair compromise, and I appreciate the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Well, it looks like there's only one member of the committee that doesn't agree with the recommendation, so the majority rules that this is our recommendation, that the ordinance be changed based on Mr. Evans' motion. So, with that said, we need to move on, and the next subject, Mr. Bosky.
Madam Chair, though I appreciate the intent of slow and steady growing the tax by 2%, I think personally, and this is just my personal thought, is that I think if we're going to increase the tax, it should be going back to the voters to let them approve an increase. So again, my druthers would have been to start at 8% or start at something that you're comfortable with, but I think the automatic escalators, in my view, are something that I can't support. So I can suspect I quote, but I will offer it anyways. I would move to eliminate the automatic, or the potential for the 2% escalator every 2 years without voter approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Is there a second for that recommendation? Okay, then we're done. Thank you, Mr. Bosky, I appreciate that. And I'm going to take the liberty as chair to just simply change the order of the agenda to deal with the 2015 bond package before we deal with the tax proposition. That's okay with you, Mr. Evans? Absolutely. Thank you. And just so everybody knows, the meeting was scheduled to end at 1:30, but we can go over, it doesn't matter. So anyway, we're now going to deal with 2015 bond package. Thank you. Before we deal with the bond issue, real briefly, Mr. Chairman, you kind of reminded me that I should probably have a motion from the committee to bring forward the recommendations as amended for the ordinance.
I'd move to bring forward the marijuana tax ordinance as amended and approved by the
Submitted by the Budget and Finance Committee with Mr. Bosky's name not on it. She asked that her name not be on it. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. And I don't think,
A couple of us have a 1:30 meeting upstairs.
okay, that's fine.
I just want.
Understood, thank you. Okay, we're done, so bond, thank you. Last, Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just want to give a quick overview of the bond proposal that we're going to be putting forward, so you had some awareness of what's going on. We're submitting a bond package of $47.86 million. It's going to be divided into 5 parts, which you will see in the proposal. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that the municipality is retiring $36 million in old bonds. We have refinanced a couple of old bond packages as well to the tune of savings in the long haul of about $40 million. Our projections are that if this bond package were to pass, it would add about $14 per $100,000 of valuation of property tax. We do this in a backdrop of low interest rates, fairly aggressive bidding on the contracts we put forward. Some of the construction costs have gone down significantly. We think we can get a lot of value for our money right now. We have to do this at a time where our state capital budgets have disappeared. We don't see any chance of them reappearing anytime in the near future. We have to backfill for some of the fairly large capital budgets that have existed in the past. We want to make sure that our economy is protected and our city continues to grow. So the projects that we put forward are all shovel-ready. We would ask that you give us a fair consideration. Lance, we can go over this in greater detail. I want to also say this. Money's cheap. Construction dollars go a long way now. But I think it's also very important for us to send a signal that as the people of Anchorage, we're willing to invest in ourselves. Because if we signal that we're willing to invest in ourselves, it's easier to get other people to invest in our community as well. And if we want to continue to grow and prosper, that's an important signal for us to send.
All right. So, Madam Chair, I will be brief. I know that we've had a long afternoon. I wanted to just kind of, I was going to talk a little bit more about the cost of funds and bond debt, and I think as this gets introduced, the proposed bonds are being introduced on the 22nd of December. Look for your action on the first meeting in January, and then so the first couple of slides, I'll go past those. Talk a little bit about what we've already approved and what this modified bond proposal does, and then I'll briefly talk about the proposed bonds, area-wide fire police, Parks and Rec, and then and I'll just highlight some of those projects. We've also proposing some other changes that relate to transit in the senior centers that would fund those either with existing funds and actually get them done potentially quicker. So if I could just go on. The mayor just talked about the cost of funds. We're actually doing better in the market. The interest rates are down. and the interest of, Mr. Moore mentioned that the interest rates are going up a little bit in the $14 per 100,000 the mayor mentioned. We took that into account in our estimation, so we've already calculated that in. This talks to, the mayor mentioned, this is our total debt in general government obligation, and I think if we want to spend more time in the future, we can speak to this one. This is basically our debt payment. As you can see off on the far right, where we are in 2015, that's the $36 million that the mayor mentioned in the bond. So that's the principal and the interest. So this graph here illustrates the approved capital improvement budget by department that's in the approved capital budget. When the Assembly acts on the bonds, we will then need to amend the CIP as it relates to bonds and the state grants. And so I'll talk about that. So the proposals that I'm going to show you next will reflect, in the end, when we bring the amendment to you, this is the 47,860 that the mayor mentioned as our bond proposal by department. And the other thing that the mayor did not mention, and one thing we are looking at, is the CIP will not include any state money for any projects. We're looking at really focusing our legislative and our state grants on the Port of Anchorage. So when we do an amendment and we have projects that have matching for state funds that are in the bond, that is not the plan that we're moving forward with. So this will be the amended CIB as we see it. So really, just to highlight, if you took the area-wide, we're going to have 5 proposed bonds. The first 3, area-wide fire and police. Area-wide, an E911 is an area-wide service. We're going to do some upgrades there, the ambulance replacement, and then some adjustments, some replacements of our cardiac monitors or life pack. On the fire department, in the fire bond, we have a heavy engine rescue we want to replace, and then a vehicle maintenance facility upgrades. So those are some improvements we want to do there. In police, we need to repair the roof. If you have not had a tour of APD headquarters in the rain, wear your gear. It does rain. They need to get some patches in the roof. The training center out on Diamond, they have some HVAC and some upgrades they want to do out there. The uninterrupted power supply, I think it's directly related to their dispatch. And then in the coming, in knowing that marijuana could be coming on board, in addition to the current capacity they have, they're looking, they need a new evidence freezer. So evidently they're debating. Parks and Recreation, the original proposed bond amount was $4 million. We've made some adjustments. It's at 3.36. And these are the list of projects here. We have some playground equipment, Campbell Creek and Coastal Trail Rehab. Many of you are aware that we've had some problems with erosion and failure out on the coastal trail. So those we're going to be focused on those hot areas. And some various park improvements. In the middle of it there, the Lake Otis Campbell Creek parking improvements. It's a parking lot over off of Lake Otis. And a variety of other projects across the city. I'd note that the Sparag Rec Center has a backup generator that's over 25 years old. It was on facilities replacement list. Sparag Rec Center also serves as an emergency shelter for if we have a need for it. We've used it in the past. So a variety of projects all across the area. And this map here that I can I'll get copies to the assembly members. There are a variety of projects all over town. So the ARTSA, this is the Anchorage Roads and Service area. This is a combination of project management, engineering, and traffic department. So the ARTSA road bond was $36,585. The first item, when you look at all the projects, if you looked at all of the ARTSA, drainage, paving, flooding, they have a variety of their spot projects all across the bowl. That's about 3.7. You saw Arctic Boulevard, that's not new, it went up a little bit. The combination of those, the next third bullet, it's about 400,000. Campbell Airstrip we added in as a result of the amendment in the CIP. The CIB got some alley, some scattered projects. We're going to continue to promote our pedestrian safety, some lighting improvements. So we really tried to keep true to the original bond that was in there, and then continuing the traffic calming, and then Wesleyan and Thurman. So some other changes that we've made, the senior centers, when we looked at putting our bonds packages together, and then we looked at other shot, maybe limiting the amount of bond that we have and the number of bonds that we have. One of the things that we looked to, so we reached out to facilities, and every year, as this body is aware, in the operating budget of M&O, they have operating dollars that they they appropriate to a capital fund. So they know that based on what they have on the books and what the current amount that's in their approved budget, what our plan here is rather than bonding for the parking lot and the Chugai Senior Center, we're going to use part of the appropriations from the approved budget in 16 to manage those rather than bond. And in the transit, they're doing pretty well on their savings, so rather than create a separate bond for that, our plan right now is to fund that one out of existing dollars. So we won't be having a transit bond on the list. So here's kind of a synopsis of the bond package. The proposed 2016 bond is about $12 million less than what's in the approved CID. We have 5 bonds, and the mayor mentioned what the assessed value. That total is the amount of the bond and the O&M. And it includes a prediction of inflation up, I think, 0.75. So we were very conservative in that estimate. So obviously, if interest rates don't go up, as Dan mentioned earlier, that number will go down. And reiterate what the mayor mentioned, we are getting very good bids. Maybe one of the good things about the oil price of oil being down is asphalt is cheap. So, and then the last thing just to highlight, in the CIB, we had a 265+ million in state grant requests from all the departments. Those will be removed. There will be no matching in the bond for this one. So that was incredibly quick. I have a lot more information. I also have a detailed handout of every single project, and I'll pass those around here for you, and you can keep those in there, illustrative of what you'll see on what's in PACE and what's in the bond. So I'm glad to, if you have any questions about the plan, if you have any questions about the projects, we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any questions from anybody?
Creative.
Okay, great. Thank you again. All right, one last item on the agenda that we need to go over. And it is the tax cap dollar proposition ordinance change. Mr. Evans, you have the floor.
And everybody's walking out.
Well,
This always happens.
They've been approved what you want to do?
Yeah, I'm just real quick. I mean, I think it's pretty, the issue is pretty straightforward. We changed the calculation about how we calculate the tax cap with respect to funds such as state revenue sharing in October, Ms. Gray Jackson's proposed ordinance. My issue is to put it back the way it was before October. That's the same formula. And the most important thing to me is that it be removed basically from the assembly at some level. Reasonable minds can disagree about whether we should do it the way Ms. Gray Jackson and others have recommended or the way I proposed it, or I prefer to do it. But ultimately, it should be an issue that is set into the charter. I think the people do expect, the charter, the tax cap is a creature of the charter. Having this little bit outside that we can kind of tinker with, I don't think is a good idea. So I would like to see it go on the ballot. Obviously, there's a disagreement on the assembly. There's some of us that want it one way, some of us want the other way. Sometimes you guys win, sometimes we win. Let's let it go to the voters, and see, which way they prefer it. I don't think, it's the amount we're talking about. We have $9 million in state revenue sharing left, I think it is, which is going to be gone in 2 years. So it's not a make or break issue. But I think the voters should have that opportunity to decide that. Also, I'm not proposing changing the current year's budget. If this should pass, it wouldn't require the budget to be revisited by the 1.6 million or something. It would still be considered lawful. Yeah, and that's it. And I think you guys understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Moss?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that the Budget and Finance Committee support Mr. Evans letting this go to the voters.
We're going to get you 2 to 1.
It's second. You have a second?
Yes.
Okay. Any dissension? I guess that's the right word. I don't agree, and I'll save my comments for debate when this ordinance, after the public hearing closes, listening to both sides. But thank you. So there's no recommendation.
Actually, Mr. Evans didn't vote. I voted yes.
I seconded.
No. So he voted yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my motion was a recommendation from the Budget and Finance Committee that Mr. Evans' proposal goes to the voters.
Right.
That's my
Right.
recommendation.
And Mr. Evans seconds the recommendation, and I don't agree.
Right, so it's 2 to 1.
Well, we have a
We have a quorum. There's 5 members, there's 3 present.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Moss, for the clarification. I got a little hung off because there's only 3 of us. But anyway, that's fine. So it's the recommendation of the quorum here that the Assembly support Mr. Evans' ordinance. Okay, thank you.
Well, just going to the voters. It's not whether we agree or disagree.
No, I think everybody gets what I need. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moss. Okay, we had a pretty heavy agenda. So, any other comments before we go to audience participation? You want to talk? Just kidding, just kidding.
May I just ask a question?
Sure.
In the discussion too, and you probably, in your department, I had made a note to, when you keep this money outside the cap for the marijuana tax, right? So something that comes to my mind, you have 7 departments that you disclose that will be involved in this and so on. What is the hurdles that you're going to face on coding it to make sure that the police department is charging towards that marijuana? Is that going to be expensive and doable?
I like to try to keep things simple. So I kind of look at it as a grant. We have staff members that sometimes they work on a grant, and sometimes they don't. And when they do their time cards, they charge the grant, and when they don't, they don't. So that's kind of...
So that is something that's already in here. So those 7 departments can charge to this marijuana tax money outside the cap.
I'm not sure. I mean, mechanically, I can't see why it can't be done, but there's probably a reason why it's complicated.
Of course.
I don't.
But I think it's an important issue because how are you going to keep that straight? And I think, we all are agreeing that it's going to be expensive.
Unless you have a dedicated staff and they don't have other tasks, it's
Right.
difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Okay, we're down to audience participation. Anybody want to say anything to the Budget Finance Committee? Okay. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for being here.